Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Circle Up and Get Real, where by now you know we talk about things that matter with people who matter. And the secret is that's everybody. So today, the people who matter, the person who matters is Jerry Nabb, who I don't really know. I've not met Jerry, had a conversation with him, but I've been following you, Jerry, for a long time on Facebook and just am so inspired by the things you post. And I reached out to you and said, I just need to know you. And I figured the best way to get to know you is to interview you for my podcast. So thank you.
You're very welcome.
I'm excited to share you with my audience. So I'll just read a little bit from the bio you sent me.
Sure.
Jerry Nabb is a personal and business coach who has been on a long and purposeful journey. He was raised in a small town in Oklahoma and left home at the age of 17 to see the world. And along the way, he has spent time in a lot of different places: community mental health, hospice care, University of Arizona. He majored in humanistic psychology and minored in dance therapy. Look at this, is all fascinating already. Jerry, Jerry participated in EST training in 1978, which is now known as the Landmark Forum. So if you've heard any of my interviews or know anything about me, you know that that's really a watershed moment for me when I did the Landmark Forum and the whole curriculum in 2003. So that's kind of what connected me, I think, Jerry, with you, because the language is pretty distinct when we get into that world of transformation, right?
Sure.
So I could keep going, but Jerry's worked with personal and business clients in their transformational and spiritual development for over 40 years. And he's coming to us today from Santa Fe, New Mexico, where he resides with his lovely wife, Beverly, and is a happy father, grandfather, and great grandfather. So welcome, Jerry.
Thank you very much.
So what was it about my invitation that had you say yes? Because that's kind of random.
Well, what had me say yes, Jody, is that I'm clear that my purpose is to make a difference. And this was an opportunity to have a conversation with you. And hopefully, maybe out of our conversation, maybe you'll have something that's valuable for you. And maybe anyone that listens to the podcast or watches it on your YouTube channel, that they might get something out of it also. So that was why I accepted your invitation.
That's so awesome. I think we're kindred souls in that way, because I don't always look at the outcome and say, I'll do it if there is an outcome or if there is something for me in it. I often will listen to my intuition, and
Yes.
connections are so important for me. And so connecting with like-minded and like-hearted others to me is worth anything.
Yes.
And that's what it feels like you are for me.
What?
It feels like you are that for me, a connection, somebody I
Yeah.
want to, it doesn't feel like it's a hard conversation to have.
No, I knew I could talk to you. I had no question about it.
Isn't that funny? So anybody out there who's listening to this, I would advise that you start paying attention to some of those glimmers, some of those God winks that might be in front of you, because maybe you're just one relationship away from having something magical happen in your life. And if you don't say yes, you'll never know.
That's right.
So Jerry, talk a little bit about your what got you here. You mentioned offline that you left home at the age of 17. What had you take this path in life, transformational path?
I'm going to say that uh, the first thing that started to open my eyes was when I was probably maybe 15 or 16. And I read a book that my cousin had given me, who was much older, called Edgar Cayce, The Sleeping Prophet. And in that moment, things shifted for me in terms of how I saw the world. Because so many things opened up out of the possibility of just ideas, beliefs, beyond just what I had known being raised in a small town in Oklahoma. And there was nothing wrong with that. It was what it was, essentially. And the next thing that happened, this was a mind blower, okay, was when I was 17, I was in my high school, one of 4 guys that had long hair.
Okay.
And the other 3 had an excuse. They were in a band, okay?
Ah,
And I was suspect because I was not in a band. So I was different in terms of where I came from.
mm,
And I felt, not that people did this, but I felt in those moments, I felt kind of like a loner.
mm,
I had friends, but I didn't belong to any particular clique or any particular group of people.
mhm.
I did a lot of reading, and I felt a little, I have to say in all honesty, you're going through angst as a teenager. So I felt a little isolated.
Mm.
So what I did was there was a particular magazine. You're not old enough to know this magazine. There was a particular magazine. It was a very slick magazine, just like Look or Life.
Uh-huh.
It's called I Magazine. And it had all kinds of incredible articles about, alternative things that you could do, musicians, various kinds of ideas politically. It was just really a hip magazine. And it was the first time I ever saw a personals column.
Oh,
They had a personal column in the back, personals column in the back. And what I did was I wrote in a letter, okay? And I can quote it. I said, help. I was really into writing poetry at the time as an emotional outlet. And I wrote in, I said, help, I'm a pure young poet stuck in a plastic pound with coal stones for people.
oh my gosh.
Again, this is a teenager
Yeah.
speak. Please help alleviate my faith in the human race. Please cast all love, poems, and letters to, and then I gave my name and address.
Wow. And did you get a lot?
I got 5,000 letters.
Oh my gosh.
5,000 letters from
Wow.
across the United States, Europe, South America, everybody just opening up their hearts and saying, we're part of your tribe.
Wow. When was this? Was this the 70s?
No, this was 1969. That's when I
Okay.
graduated high
Cool.
school. Yeah,
Wow. 5,000 people
yes,
from that one magazine and that one post.
yeah.
So what's the moral of that story for you?
Well, the moral of the story is, from my perspective, is when you reach out, then people respond.
Mm,
But if we stay inside, we have a tendency to make up all kinds of stories about what's going on out
yeah.
there and
Yeah.
whether people care or not. And it did exactly what I was looking for. It alleviated my faith in the human race. And I was like, okay, I'm stepping into the world.
Mm,
I'm not alone.
yeah.
And that made all the difference in the world for me.
So what did you do? Like, what was the next step after that? When these letters start pouring in, you're 17.
Mhm.
What did you do?
Stuck my thumb out.
Did you? Seriously?
Yes. Yeah.
Wow. Where did you
And
go?
I didn't go far. Went down. I was living in a small town called Sand Springs, Oklahoma.
Okay.
And I went down to Oklahoma City,
Mhm.
big city, right?
Yep.
And got a job down there as a janitor
Mhm.
and worked that for quite a while and continued to read and continued to just observe what I was seeing and be present to life.
Did you connect with any of those people who had written you the letters?
I did not. You got 5,000 letters. How are you going to pick somebody to
Right.
write back?
Right.
I just allowed that to be,
Mm.
and just utilize that energy in the rest of my life is basically what I did.
So in the language that I would be using now after studying a lot of things like this, what you learned at 17 was to be something. It wasn't what you did because you were a janitor. That's
Yes.
probably not something people aspire to
Right.
do,
Right.
but the doing seems to me to be secondary to who it allowed you to be.
Absolutely.
And did you have that language then?
No, did not have that language. I was just, I was clear that there was more to life than what I saw.
Mm.
And I was interested in that. And it felt, I'll have to say, in all honesty, it felt spiritual in nature.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was what I allowed to move me.
Were you raised, like, what did your parents say when their son says, hey, see ya, I'm out of here?
Well, my thought, I come from a quote, broken home.
Okay.
My father left when I was 3,
Okay.
and my mother was in a wheelchair.
Oh.
And we lived in a government housing project.
Hmm.
And so I grew up in that situation, all right? And my mother, her perspective was, whatever makes you happy, that's
Mm.
what you need to do.
Wow. Wow. So
And
you got, I mean, not that I'm going to say this kind of funny. You got the opportunity to follow your heart
yes,
without having any maybe guilt or strings attached.
no guilt or strings attached.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
How about,
my, I have to say that that was a real gift
yeah,
from my mother,
right. How
and
about religious upbringing or any kind of spiritual? Did you have any of that?
I'm sorry I laughed. My early religious upbringing was in a Baptist church.
Okay.
And if you can imagine, Oklahoma being part of the Bible Belt,
Hmm.
it was hellfire and brimstone.
Hmm.
And that was something that, as a young man, uh, we'll say, 10 years old, 11 years old, 12 years old, that's something that I ascribed to because I was moved by it.
Hmm.
And at a certain point, it felt like it was something that I needed to step beyond.
Okay.
And so then that was when I really started to look at things more from a more spiritual perspective and see things from that way.
Hmm. So there's still some faith element in that, it sounds like.
Yes.
Hellfire and brimstone is a kind of a down
Mhm.
feeling, and it sounds
Yes,
like what you're recognizing is there's more of an up feeling to
absolutely.
spirituality.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think, I think that was also me allowing myself to be guided by my intuition.
Mhm.
You know, I've spent a lifetime, getting in touch with that on a deeper level,
Yeah.
but it was very powerful for me at the time.
Right. So 17, you're a janitor for a
Yeah.
few years, you said. What happened in that process for you?
Well, I was a hippie,
Okay.
right? So my hair was about this long.
Yeah.
You can imagine how that went over in Oklahoma
Yeah.
in the late 60s, early 70s. The next thing that happened, Jody, is that so I was even as a hippie, I was a different type of person because I certainly subscribed to love and peace, and that moved me, that touched me. Okay. However, I never did any drugs.
Mhm.
Now, this is very distinct as a hippie. In the small town that I grew up in, there weren't any around. If there were any around, I probably would have done a lot of them,
Okay. Okay.
but there weren't any around. But there was an existential moment when after I left home, where I was either going to do a lot of drugs or I was going to do something else. And what I chose to do was something else, which is I put myself into psychotherapy.
Okay.
So at that time, I made a choice for me.
Mhm.
And that was very powerful for myself.
So when you say you made a choice to go into psychotherapy as a career, or did
No,
you? Okay.
I was pretty depressed at the time. Just, just again, as a teenager.
Hmm.
And, as we grow, then what happens is, in my perspective, is that we start to get in touch with feelings, oftentimes feelings that are left over from the past,
Yeah.
and oftentimes they are overwhelming.
Mhm.
And because of that, the system tries to hold on to them.
Mhm.
And what occurs is you get a depression. So when I started to open myself up like that, there was somebody to listen.
Mm.
So again, this is the theme of reaching out.
Mhm. Mhm. Early, you did that early.
Yes, I did.
Wow. So from that, then, is this when you were working as a janitor that you actually reached out to someone?
Yes, yes. Mhm.
Wow. That doesn't even seem, I can't even imagine that today in today's world where a young person would say, I want someone to talk to.
Yes.
Well, maybe it's drugs. Maybe that's the difference. Maybe people reached out to drugs where you reached out to humans.
Yeah, I mean, I can't say that for sure, but I do know that I made the right choice for myself.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I never looked back,
Mm.
in terms of that.
So you went to the University of Arizona
Mhm.
then, eventually, at some point.
Yes, now you have to understand in my life, I don't know if this is the way other people's lives go, several things happened at the same time.
Okay.
Okay. So now we'll say a couple of years down the road, all right, after being a janitor and
Yep.
going to therapy, all
Yep.
right. Uh, at that point, then I started to get interested in what I wanted to do next.
Mm.
And I had a couple of years of therapy under my belt at that point, started to really notice changes in who I was being,
Mm-hmm.
how I was reacting, etc. And so what I did was I went to work at a community mental health center
Okay.
as a paraprofessional, and they trained me to
Mm.
work with people.
Mhm.
And I did that for the next 5 years.
Okay.
So I did that. And during that same time, I went to school at a community school there in Oklahoma. At this point, I was living in Tulsa.
Okay.
And then from there, I went to the University of Arizona and studied humanistic psychology and dance therapy.
Wow. That's a fascinating combination.
Yes.
Dance therapy. How cool. I don't even know anything about that. Tell me about that.
Well, have you ever heard of art therapy?
Yes, for sure.
Okay. So similarly, what dance therapy is about is being able to at least get in touch with movement,
Mm.
be able to dance to music and express and release one's emotions and
Mm.
feelings. And they didn't have a minor or a major in dance therapy there, but they allowed me to create my own minor.
Wow.
And so I took a lot of psychology classes. I took a lot of dance classes, and the combination of the two, I put it together to be able to have that minor.
Wow. So what was at the time, if you can think back, what was your aspiration? Like what were you hoping to do with those that major and minor?
At that time, I had a fairly clear focus on wanting to be a psychotherapist.
Okay.
I've worked at a psychiatric center for 5 years. I can't tell you how amazing that was working there, simply because the medical director was someone that was extremely progressive at the time. We're
Mm.
talking early 70s. And he was bringing people from national and internationally known people in to do in-services with the staff, psychodrama, transactional analysis, uh, sensory integration, bioenergetics, gestalt therapy, all of these people. And I was enraptured,
Mm-hmm.
just in terms of being able to soak all this in. So that was my aspiration whenever I went to the university.
It sounds like if in looking back, I always love what Steve Jobs said, you can only connect the dots of your life looking back.
Mhm.
And when you do that, it feels to me like you're an old soul from the very beginning. A hippie that didn't fit in because he wasn't in a band and didn't have the group. When you just look back on that whole story, you feel to me like an old soul just looking for expression.
Mhm.
And then finding that in early-ish, because I don't know how many 17-year-olds would be open to psychotherapy at 17. And so all of that, it feels so cool to me to say you've built your life by your own design from the beginning so that you can help others do the same thing.
Yes. And, obviously, as, anyone that has, these are my words and my perspective, as
Mhm.
anyone that has chosen to be a human being, then
Mhm.
it's had its challenges also along with it.
Mhm. For sure. For sure.
And I think this is in my philosophy, the more that we, number one, accept those challenges, and number two, contextualize them in such a way that they are learning things to learn from, then that makes all the difference in the world in terms of adding meaning to one's life.
Mm. So because I'm going to say you got this so early in your life. I came to this a lot later in my understanding of things. Um, is there still a lot to learn, or do you feel like you've done a lot of the learning you need to do?
I'll tell you why I laugh is that the as one, I'll say, I'm going to use the word specifically, as one spiritually matures,
Mhm.
my perspective is that you come closer and closer to paradox. And one of the paradoxes is the more you know, the more you realize you don't know.
Yeah.
And I think that part of this incredible experience of being a human being is about consistently engaging in those kinds of questions about who am I? What's it
Mhm.
all about? What is the meaning here, etc. Because those kind of inquiries, if they are done from a heartfelt place, they continue to go deeper and deeper and deeper. And the people that have been mentors to me, the people that have been mentors to me, some of them have already passed. And what they exhibited that I aspire to is they were absolutely engaged in these inquiries and engaged in life until the moment that they passed.
Mm.
And the result was that they were alive. They were alive. They were wonderful. There was energy that came from them, and they were able to take love in and give love to people and wisdom, etc. And that's my aspiration.
Yeah. Well, I don't, like I said, I don't know you very well, but I sense that from you just from your posts. Every day you post some wisdom. At least that's in my however long I've known you. And there's some new something to think about every day from a guru somewhere, people I know, people I don't know.
Yeah.
But I learned so much just from watching what you post.
Yeah. I just so you know, I started that 5 years ago.
Mm.
Started posting something. At first, it was once in a while, and then at about 4 years ago, I started posting regardless of where I was and what I was doing. I started posting every day.
Yeah.
And all it is about is to bring a little bit more light into the world.
Mm. And you do. You do to my world. So
Thank
I'm certain that I didn't look at how many followers you have, but I know there are a lot because I watch the comments and people share from what you post.
you. Mhm.
So there's a lot going on energetically in that space, Jerry. And so that's why I'm grateful that our paths have crossed.
Yeah, absolutely.
So tell me a little bit about EST. In 78, you did the EST training, which from what I know about Landmark, EST changed to Landmark in, I don't even know, what, the 80s, 90s?
Well, what happened was, and I'm pretty familiar with this since I ended up being a staff member at a certain.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, so I did the training in 78 in Phoenix, Arizona. I had been going to school down at the University of Arizona in Tucson. And again, just it was a life-changing experience. I'm moved as I just speak about it because it impacted me so deeply. And there was so much insight and also so much to open up to and to be energized by. And so I took that energy and I just started cooking with it, girl. And within 2 years, I was on staff in Phoenix,
Mhm.
and I ended up being a center manager for EST
Mhm.
in the early 80s, managed all of their activities in Phoenix and I'm sorry, not just in Phoenix, but in Arizona and New Mexico,
Okay.
and did that for several years. And then after I left staff, then I became a seminar director, and I did that for almost 10 years.
Wow.
And so that's kind of how it cooked.
Yeah. And it was S the whole time for you?
It was right towards the end in the early 80s. The name of the company shifted to Werner Erhard and Associates,
Mm.
and then they were presenting the forum. Okay. And then it changed to where it was Landmark, and then the presentation of the basic program was the Landmark forum.
Right, right. Right. That I did it in 2003. So I didn't know of EST except what people had kind of mentioned. I looked into it later, and I, like you, it was life changing. I did the whole curriculum that year, and
Mhm.
did the seminar series, and it was very transformative. The language of it was what I loved so much because I am an English major, and I appreciated so much the context. Uh,
Yes,
all of it made sense to me in my head,
yes,
and it made
yes.
sense to me in my understanding of spirituality at the time too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I, this is, this is an interesting little story, which is that the way that I heard about it was I was in Tulsa and I belonged to an organization that was called the Association for Spiritual Harmony. This
Mm,
is while I was working at the psychiatric center.
okay.
And there was a person that was part of that organization that was a, what do they call them now? A channel.
Ah, yeah.
And I had a reading with this person.
Uh-huh.
And I said, is there anyone, in my life that I should get to know better? And they mentioned a person. And it wasn't someone that I knew well. And but I took that information and I went and, had lunch with this person. And it was like this, like brothers.
Wow.
And he is the one that had done the S training.
Okay.
And that was the person that turned me on to it.
Mhm. Yeah. So, let's fast forward a little bit. You've dedicated your life to this work, and I so love that because I bet you can see effects around you. When we're at cause, we see effects differently than if we're only looking at effects.
Oh, absolutely.
Are you noticing things around you that are positively influenced by your being?
Well, I think consistent with what might be called transformational theory,
Hmm.
as well as spiritual theory,
Hmm.
uh, I think that one's outer life is a reflection of one's inner state.
Hmm.
And I think that the more that one works on that, the more that one sees those effects, whether it be in their relationship with their children, or their relationship, their primary relationship with a mate, if they have a romantic relationship, or whether it be just with the world in general.
Hmm.
I think it makes a huge difference.
Hmm.
I know uh, that a lot of the work that I have done on myself, I'll speak for myself, in terms of my own journey, uh, at a certain point, I knew I needed to go deeper inside. Yes, I was learning a lot of stuff from here or from there or whatever, and I was drawn to it. And I knew I needed to go deeper in here. And that made all the difference in the world because at that time, uh, then I was starting to look at why do I why do I make these choices that I make in life? I can't just assume, you know, that they're really for me.
Mm,
And as I looked at that more and more and more, I started to be, and you have to be willing to look at it.
right.
And it's quite daunting at times, but you can start to see conclusions that you have made when you were young that are still playing out like an endless tape.
Mhm.
And then you wonder, why do I keep attracting that kind of person? Why did this situation keep showing up in my life? Well, it's no mistake.
Right.
It's part of what we're putting out there, and it's also part of whatever the lessons are for us to learn.
So if we were learning all these lessons and experiencing these understandings by ourselves,
Mhm.
that would be lonely.
Depends, okay? That there are a lot of things that it requires someone from the outside to be able to objectively give you a perspective,
Mhm.
okay? Then there are certain things that, you can work on with yourself with a commitment to growth, all right? And then there is the possibility of community.
Mhm. Mm.
And all of those things make a difference in a different way.
So in that order,
Not necessarily, no.
okay. Because in community, that's what I loved about the seminar series. Because at the forum itself, when I did the forum, there were 120 people in my weekend. And I
Yes.
did have a huge opportunity to connect with too many of them because there were so many. But the seminar series was really good for that. And what I'm learning now in the world, for me, community is important because I want to not believe I'm the only one doing this work or the only
Right.
one feeling what I'm feeling.
Yes.
And I think about the way our United States, as one example, feels so divided right now.
Yes.
What do you think would be a solution, not the solution, but a solution to bring us closer together, if that's even important?
Well, let me say something first,
Yeah.
which is that I think one of the fundamental issues on this plane of existence, so I'm gonna get esoteric for a second.
Good. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, one of the fundamental issues, Jody, is duality.
Mm-hmm.
Duality meaning the perception of good, bad, right, wrong, black and white, etc. We deal with these things, whether we realize it or not, inside of ourselves all of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And to the degree that we are subject to those belief systems inside ourselves and we don't question them, then they just play out, as I said before.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And that perspective of duality is on a it's on an unconscious emotional level.
Yeah.
And one of the things that and I don't know if they said this in the forum, because I can't recall, because I've done the forum and the landmark forum. But in I can tell you for sure, one of the things that they said was that the purpose of the mind is survival, survival of the being or anything that the being considers itself to be.
Mm.
So that is just like tossing a pebble into a pond. The waves go like this. So if I consider myself to be my opinions and somebody challenges me, my survival is threatened. So that's where the reaction comes from.
Sure.
Is my survival really threatened? No. The identity might be threatened to some degree, all right? So then that's where those reactions come from. We
Yeah.
see this all the time in relationships, okay? Well, then you just take and map that onto the various political factions. You take it and map it onto the various differences between cultures, the differences between countries, the differences with people that have different languages, etc.
Yeah.
So what's driving us to some degree, if we don't challenge it, is fear.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you asked, is there a solution? I don't know if there's a solution. I do know in my heart that letting go of that duality and being able to open my heart makes a difference in my world.
Yeah.
And my belief system is that every step that I take in that direction, whether it's a smile at a grocery clerk or whether it's letting somebody cross the street in front of me, makes a difference.
Yeah.
Every single little thing makes a difference.
Yeah. Yes. And that is, anybody listening, that is what each of us can do. That I love your analogy of the ripples, because drop the pebble and the ripples go way beyond that pebble. It's precession. It's the law of precession.
Yes.
You know, what I learned from studying Buckminster Fuller, you know, those kinds of opportunities that we all have, every one of us has, really will change the
Yes.
world we live in, transform the
Right.
world we live in.
That's right.
Yeah.
And it also, I mean, it gives us an opportunity to look to see why are we here?
Mm.
What's it about?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and those kinds of questions can go very deep.
Yeah.
And really empower someone in terms of their own personal search for who they are.
So then the outside influences, or the political world we live in, or the wars, or all those kinds of things on the outside, are always going to be there in some way, shape, or form. It doesn't matter, as long as I shouldn't say it like that, but I can control what I can work on.
Yes.
And as I work on me, like you said, we go inside, that makes a difference. And holding the door for someone, or, you know, waving at someone, doing all those little things.
That's right.
Really, it's like the butterfly effect.
Yes.
somewhere along the line, something millions of miles away is being affected by us energetically and spiritually.
Absolutely.
So I'm a student of A Course in Miracles and have been for about 20 years. And there's such a connection
Yeah.
between what we're talking about here and that study, love and fear. If there's only two ways of looking at things, which will you choose?
Mhm.
You already mentioned that fear isn't real necessarily. It's our identity trying to protect itself, and it may not even be true. And
Mhm.
all of those awarenesses, and then allowing, which is hard for we humans who want to hold on to stuff.
Yes.
The allowing and the letting go of things is what I'm recognizing for myself. That's making my life a whole lot easier than when I thought I had to do everything.
Yeah, sure. And I'll tell you something, I'm someone that I'm a voracious reader, right?
I can
And
tell by what you post.
so the more that you look at, or the more that you have a commitment to grow, or a commitment to discover whatever the truth is, okay? And the more material that you read, the more you see the similarities between the various spiritual paths, between the various theories, etc. Rather than seeing the differences, you start seeing the connections. And it's like, wow, I just had this aha moment about something, and then a year later I read something, and it's like these people have known it for 100 years. No?
Yeah, yeah. Well, and that's the funny thing. When I was early in this, I used to want to be on the cutting edge, and
Yes.
there would be a new book out, and I'd say, I wanted to be the first one. Did you know about this new book? And I kind of poo-pooed all of the ancient wisdom because I thought, well, people already know that. I got to be first. And to your point, it's so amazing how wise people were so many years ago.
That's right. I mean, the a case in point, is Rumi.
Yes. Oh, I love Ruby. Yes.
Rumi is so deep in the year 1200, or even the teachings of Christ, or
Yes.
the teachings of Buddha,
Yes.
or etc. It's just so amazing how deep that people have been.
Mhm.
And, I think sometimes we, in our effort to just kind of get through life, or get through whatever's happening in the world or in our jobs or whatever, we overlook what might be questioned to be able to see what the truth might be.
Yeah.
Because oftentimes, and this is the kicker, is it's mixed together. Sometimes you have the truth, and sometimes you have a distortion, and then another distortion. A good example is, I think we all have an innate desire to connect with a mate, okay, and to have a loving relationship that we can share with. But I think we also, to some degree, we also sometimes have a motivation of, I'm not okay if someone doesn't care about me.
Mm.
Or if I don't have a relationship, then I'm not all right.
Mhm.
So these things get mixed up together. And unless we question it and don't extrapolate it, it causes issues ongoingly.
But Jerry, that's such hard work. I
Yeah.
just want to do the easy stuff. I don't want to think that much.
Yeah, well,
Have you ever had anybody tell you that? People have told me, Jody, you think too much.
you know, I think there's a difference between being discerning, Jody, and being over analytical.
Mm.
I think being over analytical is I'm an analytical thinker, all right?
Yeah.
But I think if somebody over analyzes or they obsess,
Mm.
then I think what happens is that's a distortion,
Mhm.
okay?
Yeah.
It's not based in the truth. It's
Mm.
a compulsion that it's an adaptive mechanism that they started when they were younger for whatever
Mm.
reason, and it's continued on.
Yeah.
And if it gets questioned, then there's a shift there. Now, are there challenges on, quote, the path? Okay, absolutely.
Mm.
And does everybody have the same lessons? Not necessarily. There's 1,000 paths to get to the mountain, and there are as many paths as there are people in the world.
Yeah.
So who am I to say what's going to work for you or what's going to work for you? However, the people I've found that I, as a personal coach as well as a business coach, am clearly and grounded in being a facilitator for change.
Mm.
Now, as I've done this over the years, people that don't want to change, they run from me like the plague. People that are interested in changing, then there's a resonance there between myself and them.
Mhm.
So that's what the relationship is built on in terms of whatever we create together.
Yeah. So tell me more about some of your business clients or the work that you're doing that impacts business.
Okay. So I focus on small businesses, all right? Teams, businesses that have teams pretty much, there's one exception, but most of the time it's teams not larger than 10.
Okay.
Okay. And the reason is I feel like that is my forte.
Mhm.
And so consequently, then that's the market that I work with. All right. I've had a niche market at one point with dentists.
Okay.
Dentists, very interestingly, are quite open to change and doing things differently as a culture.
Mm.
And so consequently, I work with a lot of dentists.
Okay.
I've also worked with attorneys. I've also worked with medical doctors. I've also worked with manufacturers. I have a client that I just absolutely love to death that's in Berkeley, that what they manufacture is they manufacture ghee, which is
Oh,
a clarified butter
yeah.
that is a good fat.
Yeah.
And I've worked with this gentleman for 12, 13 years.
Wow.
And his business has grown, exponentially out of that work that we have done together. Now, that's based on his commitment to grow,
Mhm.
and it's also based on me empowering the commitment that he has.
Right. Right. Do they find you through word of mouth or do you market or how do you grow your own business?
I have not had to do any marketing for a number of years. And I think part of it has to do with people refer me if they get the results that they want or they find value. The way that I look at it, Jody, is when I'm working with someone, I want to make sure that I make an impact, and I mean that positively.
Mhm.
And so consequently, I don't rest on my laurels.
Yeah.
So if I'm committed to them getting value every single time that I meet with them in some way, shape, or form. Sometimes it's something small, sometimes it's some breakthrough in communication. It's all different kinds of things, all right? But the way that I look at it is the only thing that I can afford out there in the world in terms of the reputation is somebody saying that's the best money I ever spent.
Right. Right.
And as long as I adhere to making that kind of difference or giving that kind of value, it just sort of happens.
Mhm. Mhm. And I think that I've struggled with that my whole career because I, for whatever reason, have had a tough time with value, cost, worth, and price.
Mhm.
And they've been kind of overlapped. When I can have a tangible something that I can sell to someone and they can touch it,
Yeah.
that's easier for me to sell.
Yes.
The outcomes that people would have if they did the work is a big if.
Mhm.
And so until recently, the last few years, I've kind of come into my own in that way.
Yes.
Is that ever a struggle that you've had with the intangibility of your product?
Absolutely. I
Mhm.
mean, I think there's a distinction between thinking and thoughts.
Yes.
I read in Scientific American at some point that we had somewhere in the neighborhood of about 40,000 thoughts a day.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. Those are not necessarily thinking,
Mhm.
okay? But our mind is constantly feeding us stuff. What we should do, shouldn't do, better do, gotta do, must do, have to do, etc. I mean, it seems like the damn thing wakes up about 10 minutes before I do.
Right. Right.
And as soon as I wake up, it's going.
Mhm.
Now, I have an opportunity to either buy into that, and if I bought into it, my life would look like chaos. Because if I thought, well, I don't want to go to work today, well, then, I wouldn't go to work. Well,
Right.
that's not going to work,
Yeah.
you know. The same thing with our feelings. You know, I think to a large degree, our feelings and our thoughts are random and capricious. Now, however, I think we have something to say about how we allow those things to affect us,
Mm.
impact us, because who we are is beyond those feelings, beyond those thoughts. So I can remember that after I started being a coach, it took me 5 years to be able to suspend the disbelief that I was actually doing this and making a living.
Yeah, I can completely relate to that.
And I still, I mean, my mind every once in a while, I'll be on the way to a client. Maybe this is a client I've had for a couple of years or something. And my mind says, they're going to fire you today based on no reality
Right.
whatsoever. You know, the mind just throws that stuff out from time to time, you know?
Yeah.
And so I've learned to
Mm.
observe my mind and those thoughts,
Mhm.
and to practice that muscle of letting go.
Yeah. So I'm going to go back to Oklahoma for a second.
Yeah.
Living in Oklahoma in a small town where, as a young kid, you were having these kinds of awarenesses. People thought you were probably crazy. You left to the big city, eventually ended up in Arizona. You're now in New Mexico. Are you finding that community is important to you? And are you in a community that supports you physically now?
I find that like attracts like. So there are certain people in the community. There's not one community that I belong to specifically, but there are a number of people that are spiritual leaders or psychotherapists, et cetera, that I resonate with, and we share ideas and things like that. I have this one friend, this, I don't know whether you find this interesting or not. Uh, I have a particular friend that he was a Zen monk for 10 years.
Wow.
And where we met, though, is we met at the Santa Fe Table Tennis Club.
Oh,
So I think I don't know if you're a nut about it, but I think you're into sports. Have been.
yes, yes, yes.
So my sport that I found, uh, I played a lot of table tennis when I was in college.
Okay.
I gave it up for 35 years. And then I started playing again about 12 or 13 years ago competitively.
Oh, okay.
And so now I play in the Senior Olympics.
Wow.
And so I met this gentleman. It's interesting. I met him at the table tennis club, and we're close friends. And
Wow.
because there's a resonance, not
Mhm.
just the table tennis connection, but just on a spiritual level,
Mhm, mhm.
you know?
So what I learned from COVID is that energy is non-geographic. And
Yes.
I met so many people during COVID when I was in my home office by myself.
Yep.
And
Yes.
so that's been amazing. I mean, I feel very connected to you. And, I've only been following you for a year or so. I don't even know what had me reach out to you. I just needed people to know you. I needed my people who are listening and following me to know you.
Mhm.
It's just something about the work you're doing in the world. And I'm fascinated. So I thank you for taking the chance to meet with somebody you didn't even know and be part of this conversation, because we both know everything starts with conversation. I mean,
Yes.
the language we have is all we really have at the beginning of any kind of relationship.
Absolutely. And there's two things happening, I think. You know, there is the languaging
Mhm,
that we are doing in terms of communication, and then there's also that energetic connection
mhm,
too.
mhm,
You
for
know,
sure.
that's certainly something that I feel all the time. You know,
Mhm.
and I feel it with
Well,
you.
I do. Oh, thank you, Jerry. Thank you. So if somebody heard something today that they're interested in, are you taking new clients, or are you looking to build your practice at all?
Yes and no. I mean,
Okay.
there's not I don't have a drive right now
Mhm,
to get new clients.
mhm,
However, if someone was interested, all they need to do is check my Facebook page, and that, I believe that has my email address, also
mhm,
has my phone
mhm,
number.
mhm.
And if someone, contacted me, I certainly would give them some time in terms of speaking with them.
Okay, but there it is, everybody. Jerry Nabb, you need to, I put this in the show notes,
Okay.
but there's something here. And following Jerry on Facebook, I tell you, if you will just do that on a regular basis, you will feel something. And I look into some of the people you write about. I've heard of some of them. I've not heard of some of them, but all the wisdom you share is I feel comforted by that somehow. And I just wanted to thank you for helping me through some of the days because I love what you write. And I just felt like there was a person behind what was being shared that I needed to know.
Yeah, it's my privilege and it's my honor.
Oh, thank you, Jerry.
Yeah.
So everybody, please reach out to Jerry if you heard anything. And as always, just get real.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody. We'll talk again.
Yeah.
I'll just stop the recording, Jerry.